We can talk about mindfulness all day long, and then
You're
when
listening
I go
to Get
and
Your
sit
Marriage
and
On,
I
the fun
meditate
and
for a
spicy
second,
podcast, bringing you new tools and
it's
fresh
frustrating.
ideas so
You know,
that you can be
realize
the
how quickly
sexiest couple you
you
know.
lose attention and how noisy.
Your full presence is one of the greatest gifts you can give another person. By being fully present, I mean your mind is free from distractions, so you can truly be with the person you love in mind, body, and spirit, especially in our most precious, intimate moments. And if you're like me, I admit this is an area I am trying to get better at. Mindfulness is a buzzword these days, but its roots are deep. I met Dr. Chelom Leavitt, PhD, an impressive woman that researches the link between mindfulness practice, which is the ability to be fully present, and sexual satisfaction in long-term married couples. The things I learned in this interview have changed the way I interact with others, especially Emily and my children, in profound ways. Now, before we dive into episode 44, I want to briefly mention that I want to encourage you and your spouse to join me in making Sexy September, aka a Sextember, for the month of September. What this means for us is we take time this September to identify one or two things that are currently getting in the way of our intimacy, and we make a proactive plan to work on it. It doesn't mean you have to have sex every day for the month, unless, that's what you both decide to do. But it just means working on common obstacles to intimacy, such as, is it a lack of time? Is it feeling tired and stressed? Is it kids? Is it bedroom boredom? Or whatever it might be. Anyway, more details will be available in the Intimately Us app, and check your inbox if you subscribe to our newsletter for details. And now for Dr. Chelom Leavitt. Dr. Chelom Leavitt, I am so excited to have you join the podcast today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Now, you're a pretty impressive lady, I got to say. You have a Juris Doctorate and a PhD. So you've been a lawyer, and now you've switched to research, and you have 9 children, and you're bilingual. You grew up in the Ukraine, and you split your time between Ukraine and the United States. You're an incredible, powerful person.
That's kind of you. I don't feel powerful, but I feel like some of the things that I'm doing are really important. So thank you.
I agree. Very important. Now, the main reason why I'm interested in having you on as a guest on the podcast is kind of for selfish reasons, because I have a hard time keeping my mind focused all the time during sex. And knowing that you've done a lot of research in mindfulness and sex, I want to learn more about what your research is, and also your journey and how you got here. What got you interested in this topic in the first place?
And that's a great question. I was actually a lawyer over in Eastern Europe and started noticing couples in a different way than I had before, and realized that there were some particular challenges that couples in Eastern Europe were facing. And it just got me interested in how we develop relationships, how we strengthen or maintain relationships. And so when we moved back to the States, I ended up getting my master's in marriage, family, and human development. And then because of the research I was doing, I went ahead and finished up with a PhD and focused on sex, and then how we can be mindful, how mindfulness really improves that sexual experience. You're not the only one, by the way. Lots of people are struggling with this.
Yeah. And mindfulness is kind of like a buzzword these days. You have mindfulness apps and mindfulness meditation retreats and all sorts of things. But combining that work and that science with sexuality, you're probably one of the early pioneers in that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I was hearing a little bit about mindfulness while I was in my PhD program, and it just clicked with me that this has got to apply to sex. That this is oftentimes where people feel heightened anxiety, even if it's positive anxiety, like arousal. And so then we our minds get a little fuzzy and we start wandering off in other places rather than being able to focus on who we're with and how our body is feeling and what we're actually experiencing. So I did some research and I looked to see if anybody had looked at these two things combined, sexuality and mindfulness. There had been a little research done on just how general mindfulness might help somebody with sexual dysfunctions or other things like that, but nothing that specifically looked at how mindful are you during sex and how can you focus your attention and learn to improve those skills. So yeah, that's what I began with. And it's been a really fun journey. The thing that's so nice about it is, like you, so many people, when they hear that, they're like, that makes sense. But how do I do that?
Right. Right. So how did you do that research? Did you do a lot of interviews? Did you start teaching classes? What's that process like? Like, how do you coach or help people through that?
Yeah, well, so it was kind of a two-part process. First of all, we looked at how could we even measure this? And so I started just talking to people about where they were at right now. And we did some survey research work in 3 different countries, in the U.S., in Turkey, and in Ukraine, because I love Ukraine. And,
right. Uh-huh.
And there are also 3 very different cultures. So we wanted to see, how does this look for people, not just in the United States, but people all over the world. And what we found was that there were, our measure boiled down to about 7 questions. And it really focused on 2 aspects: how aware I am of my own body and sensations during sex, and then how judgmental I am about my experience and about my partner. And so those 2 things, awareness and judgment, seem to be really key in how we maintain mindfulness during sex. And so then the next step was, can we teach this to people? And we found that indeed we can. We created a curriculum, and then we measured a number of different aspects of couples' relationships before this class and then afterward. And in fact, we followed them in a subsequent study. We followed them for about 8 months to see if these effects were long lasting or if it just kind of gave a little boost right during the class and then petered out.
Right.
What we found was that it had long-lasting effects, that it helped people think differently about their relationship, about their sexual experience, about themselves, really. And so we now have taught a number of different groups this curriculum on sexual mindfulness, and have seen really positive results. And in fact, we even interviewed people afterwards so that they could give us feedback that maybe we weren't asking the right questions. And what we found was that people were super excited about this. It was simple, but it was new to them, and not something that you would just normally come up with on your own. Even if you're just mindful in your regular life, you may not know how to transfer that to your sexual life.
I see. All right. So I want to know what's in your curriculum. Can you give us today a little summary of that? Maybe help.
I can give you a few ideas about it. Mm-hmm. But really, we take about 3 weeks to help people ease into this and to practice, and then ask us questions, because it's different theoretically, right, from practice. We can talk about mindfulness all day long, and then when I go and sit and I meditate for a second, it's frustrating. You realize how quickly you lose attention and how noisy our brains can be. And so it's really important for us to give people a little scaffolding as they learn about it, right? To kind of help coach them through some of the pitfalls that will naturally occur. So some of the things we talk about is actually counterintuitive to what our culture teaches today.
Oh, really?
And that's that we want to slow sex down. We in movies, in media, in articles, so often we're talking about ramping sex up and speeding it up and quickly getting to orgasm, or having orgasm as a goal that we're, driving towards. And what we really talk about is letting go of all those things, staying in the moment. When your spouse touches you or hugs you, can you slow down your thoughts and just be present in that moment? Notice the sensations that you feel as you just hold each other, as you look into each other's eyes, as you kind of slow down that experience of intimacy. We talk about intimacy as if it's a euphemism for sex.
Right. All the time.
And sometimes we miss the point that intimacy is multifaceted, right? We have intellectual intimacy, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, which can or maybe doesn't mean sex, right? I can be intimate in a number of different ways. And so it's important for us to understand that emotional intimacy, relational intimacy, intellectual intimacy, all kind of feed in to physical intimacy. If we're doing things, in a way that really strengthens and builds our relationship, most likely all of those things are going to come first. And then as we engage in a physical relationship, that's a natural outgrowth of this intimacy that we've had in every other dimension of our life.
Right. It's not so neatly compartmentalized like a bento box. It all kind of blends together and helps feed and strengthen each other.
Yeah. And I like to describe it as, if I'm undressing myself emotionally for my husband, and we're talking about things that I don't tell other people, and maybe it's pretty vulnerable for me to share whatever it is I'm sharing, and he's doing the same, and we're trying to meet each other's needs in being loving about what this new information is. As we do that, the natural outcropping of that is undressing physically and allowing ourselves to share this physical intimacy with each other. And then what we notice is a connection like you can't have if you're just focused on the physical connection, right? If I've included the emotional and the intellectual and even the spiritual intimacy, and then we engage in physical intimacy, what people report is that there's a meaning that comes from that physical connection that wasn't there previously.
I love that. And what you're saying reminds me, so Emily and I just got back Saturday from a marriage retreat. It was a couples retreat with Dr. Corey Allen. And one of the exercises we did, there's about 30 couples. We're on the conference room. We sat like hip to hip facing each other. And for a few minutes, one was the giver, one was the receiver. And we're to like touch each other, like face, hair, shoulders, arms. We're in a public place, so nothing too intimate as far as touch goes. But while we touch, the giver was to concentrate on like things you cherish and adore about your spouse. And the receiver was to really focus their mind on what that touch is meaning. And it was very intimate. And then partway through, Dr. Allen said, okay, now if you're the giver, I want you to now think about Monday and work and kids and chores you need to do, but still keep touching the same way you're touching. But as a receiver, it felt very different. Like just being aware of that. It's the same touch, same things, but it's almost as if the mind behind that touch, we can sense that and we can feel that. Is that kind of related to what you're referring to here?
It absolutely is. In fact, we do a similar sort of exercise to give that to make that very point, that when we're distracted, we may even be engaging in the same physical touch, but something is missing, right? And that's part of mindfulness, right? Is that we can slow down and focus on this person. We give them our full presence. We're not distracted with work on Monday. We're actually thinking about what it is that my relationship with this person means right now. Yeah.
How do you, so is it attention, holding your attention longer? Is that like a muscle you can strengthen?
Yeah, in fact, that's exactly how people describe it, is that learning to be mindful. Like if I think about being mindful in my everyday life, can I eat mindfully? Am I paying attention to the texture and the taste of the food? And am I really savoring that? Or when I'm with my child, can I give them my full attention and really listen to not only what they're saying, but who they are and what this must mean for them to be talking to me about whatever it is they're talking to me about. And so as we take 10 minutes a day and just meditate, clear our mind, and just focus on our breath. It's interesting because our breath, when we take our first breath as a baby, right, newborn, we celebrate that. That's our birthday, right? That's a beautiful day and marks the beginning of our life. And then when we take our last breath, that designates the end of our life. And we celebrate people's lives as they pass. But it's all those breaths in between that we kind of ignore. We don't really understand. Those breaths are also important. As I take a breath, can I really connect with my own body? Can I really give space to feel and think what it is I might feel and think in that moment? And so as we transfer that, we practice it outside of sex. Because once we're engaged in sex, we know we have heightened arousal, heightened anxiety. And so sometimes it's much more difficult to stay focused and to stay mindful. So
yes, especially sex is usually very anxious or anxiety inducing.
For a lot of people. Yeah. And it's interesting. Well, I'll get into that in a minute. We know there's a difference between men and women in how they experience the anxiety of sex, right? So the goal, though, is to practice being mindful outside of sex so that we get a pretty good foundation. We understand the skills. We can continue to improve in this 10 minutes a day. We know for some reason 10 minutes is the dosage that seems to help people improve. Anything less than that, we don't see the same results. So we encourage people, start meditating, and there's lots of different ways to meditate. You don't have to sit on your butt and be silent. You can walk, you can run, you can sing songs. There's lots of ways to meditate. So, but do that for 10 minutes a day.
And then so just to be clear, I want to know, what am I doing for those 10 minutes?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You can either go through a guided meditation where, you can I have a few that I really love, and I'll share those with you. But you can even just, look up on YouTube, 10-minute guided meditation. There are thousands. And most of them are really good. So what you're doing is you're clearing your mind as much as you can, and you're kind of centering all of your presence on your breath. Right? So just pay attention to your breath and let everything else go. It's really just giving your mind a break. Even when we're sleeping, our mind is working. And so it's really important for us to learn to skillfully let our mind relax. People who can do that have better control over their mind in times where their mind needs to be engaged. And so really that's the beginning of building that muscle that you're talking about. So just start trying to meditate 10 minutes a day. Doesn't have to be long. 10 minutes is really, I really rarely go longer than a 10-minute meditation. Unless I'm walking or running. And then I might do it longer just because I like the exercise too. So people can start to build that skill, build that muscle, and then we take it into the realm of sex. So now when I start to engage in a sexual encounter with my partner, can I slow that down right at the get-go? because too often we're trying to heighten arousal really quickly because the goal seems to be orgasm for so many people.
And get there quick.
Yeah, and get there quick, which is interesting. Why are we rushing through such a pleasant experience?
Right. And I hear from a lot of men, they get frustrated when it takes more than 20 minutes for her to come.
Yeah, right. And so we do have to give space, right? We have to give enough time for that sexual encounter to allow it to unfold however it's going to unfold. Set aside an hour, and then just connect with each other through holding, just hugging. And in fact, I don't know if you've ever read any of Dr. David Schnarch's work.
Yes.
But he calls it heads on pillows, right? Where people are lying next to each other, with their head on the pillow, just looking, just gazing into each other's eyes. And at that point, you can just focus on your breath and just be present with your partner. And so that's one activity that we talk about in helping couples kind of slow down that sexual experience, be present with each other. And then once they've done that for a while, touch, and see if you can really, like you were describing in the activity you just did this weekend, if you can really focus on what it feels like to touch someone or to be touched. What is that sensation? Maybe there's some irritation with some types of touch, right? Maybe some people don't like being touched lightly, or they don't like a lot of pressure, or once it gets repetitive, that's annoying. And so you have to be able to describe that to your partner and say, I really like how you're touching me right now. Or I don't like when it becomes repetitive like that. It somehow irritates me. And we know, especially for women, irritation can be part of what they have to describe in their sexual experience. Some sort of movement or touch can actually be too, they may have a heightened sensitivity to that sort of sensation. And so too much of it is actually annoying after a while. Yeah. So it's really important to be able to talk about that.
And then as you've done this research in other countries and cultures, and I'm sure lovemaking might look differently culturally, but this concept still applies.
Yeah.
How is it that as you're more mindful, how does that increase we talked about not having a goal, like it's not about orgasm per se, but what are the benefits? What are the other goals, I guess, the benefits you get out of this kind of more slower approach towards sex?
Yeah, well, first of all, we would probably say don't have a goal in sex. Just enjoy whatever time you have with each other. And as you feel more arousal, which you're bound to feel, right, as you're present with each other, as you feel more arousal, orgasm will come when it comes. What's interesting is we just published an article in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, and it shows that women and men who are more sexually mindful actually have more consistent orgasms and feel more sexual satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And so really important for us to understand, we're not saying that you're not going to feel pleasure and orgasm and arousal. In fact, you're going to feel it in an abundance. Mm-hmm. But it's when we take the pressure off of getting to orgasm that we actually can enjoy all of the little steps that take us to orgasm. Instead of rushing right by them, thinking, I've got to get to orgasm to satisfy my partner. And then we miss so much of the connection and joy and pleasure that comes from all of the little moments that take us to orgasm.
Got it. I love that. You mentioned earlier about anxiety, and you said you could touch on that a bit. Can you
Yeah.
talk on that?
It's interesting because sexual mindfulness really consistently seems to have greater benefits for women than men.
Oh, why is that?
So we've thought about that. Part of the reason is that men are more sexually mindful to begin with.
Okay.
Men are very good at compartmentalizing their lives, and so that works really well in sex. Women, their lives are a little more integrated, right? What they have to do for the PTA blends in with, when they're buying groceries and when they're talking to a child and when they're having sex. And that's unfortunate for women. Women could learn a little bit from men by learning to compartmentalize, particularly their sexual experience. Just kind of block everything else out. Take a minute, let go of all the noise that's going on in their head, and just tune in to their body, the sensations that they're feeling. Another problem that women have to face, and we talk about this in my curriculum, is that women, and research has shown this over and over, that when women think about what is a successful sexual encounter, most often women are thinking about whether or not their partner had a good experience. They're not thinking about what they experienced. So women are very other focused, which again is such a great quality. But in sex, you have to be a little self-focused too, so that you can tune into what's happening to your body and then share that with your spouse. So we see that women struggle with more anxiety and are a little disconnected from their body. Some research has shown that women will report that they're not feeling arousal when in reality their body is starting to lubricate, they're starting to have more blood flow. And so for some reason there's a disconnect between what they register mentally and what their body is actually experiencing.
Is that called non-concordance?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so sexual mindfulness helps remove that and create more concordance, right? More connection between what they actually realize about their body and what their body is feeling.
So it's like being in your body.
Yeah, that's been shown in a number of different studies with lots of different samples of women, a number of different ages. And so it's important for women to understand it's okay to take some time for yourself, to really connect with your body, to slow down this sexual process so that you're feeling the right amount of arousal and you're connecting with that arousal. Then women are going to have a much better sexual experience.
Does it help to do more like take turns being a giver and a receiver if this is something you're trying to work on in your marriage?
Yeah, that might be a nice way to approach it. I think most often what we need to do is both take a minute at the beginning of your sexual interaction and just make sure you're grounded in your own body. Just give yourself a little time to connect with your breath and to slow down your mind, and then to see if you can then kind of tune into your partner. So once you're then touching, can you still maintain that centered presence in yourself, but then include your partner with that?
Got it. I just had a question. A lot of focus on mindfulness seems to be on your breath. Is that because that's the one part of our body that we have both full conscious control of and unconscious control of with the sympathetic, parasympathetic? So it kind of brings those two in alignment. Is that why the focus on the breath is helpful?
I think that's part of it. I think that it gives us a place to focus, and that place is constant, right? If I'm focused maybe on my stomach or, my brain, which is mostly where most of us are focused. It's interesting, though. I'll tell you about this little piece of research. People accuse men of thinking about sex, every so often. I've heard different,
too much or whatever.
But very, very regularly, right? That men think about sex. And it's actually true. We see that in research, that men do think about sex more often than women do. But men also think about being hungry more than women do, and being thirsty more than women do. So what that tells us is that men are actually just a little more connected with their body. Now, some of this has been socialized, right? Women from very young ages have been taught to be other focused, to be focused outside of their body. Men or little boys have been allowed to be a little more connected with their bodies. And so part of it is we've been socialized this way. And so we have to overcome that. And breath is just this one constant that all of us experience. Every 6 seconds, we breathe in and we breathe out. And so that just gives us a nice, anchor to connect with our body.
What if you are really into wanting to be more mindful and your spouse isn't?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In fact, we're doing some research on that right now. What we know is that mindfulness is really an internal process. So it's not something that you have to have partner buy-in.
Okay.
Would it be helpful to have partner buy-in? Yes. We know that our partner's mindfulness actually impacts us too. However, that doesn't mean it prohibits us from being more mindful and having all the benefits of being mindful in general and then also sexually mindful. We have seen that individuals who are mindful, despite how their partner is, have report these benefits of more sexual satisfaction, more consistent orgasms, and more relational satisfaction as well.
So if your partner is really like goal-oriented in sex, wants just to get to orgasm, and you're like, I want to slow things down, you can still experience a good mindfully connecting. It can be unilateral. It doesn't have to be two-way.
Yeah, it can absolutely be unilateral, but if it is the woman who is wanting to slow things down and the man is kind of constantly speeding things up, that may create, some problems with the environment, because women, we know, need a longer time to feel arousal, at least enough arousal that will help her over that orgasm threshold. So I think in a situation like that, if the man were less mindful and the woman were more mindful, they may need to negotiate. We need to at least give me enough time so that I can feel enough arousal to hit orgasm, or at least to feel like I felt enough connection and arousal that I'm satisfied.
And you can probably start that work prior to your encounter too.
Absolutely.
Earlier in the day or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's the old saying that says, good sex at 9:00 at night starts at 2:00 in the afternoon. So it's the playful banter. It's the connecting with each other. It's the connecting with yourself and making sure you yourself are ready for that kind of connection with each other.
Very good. It is so fun to talk to a PhD and a sex expert at the same time. I want to know, what are your black belt sex tips?
Wow.
This is for a couple where things are good and they want to take things better. They've listened to this. They're doing the mindfulness more practice so that they're more present with each other. What other tips do you have to take sex from where it is to even better?
I like that question. Almost every single seminar that I teach, I will give this advice and somebody will raise their hand and say, oh dear, this advice is going to make me very nervous. And the advice is this. It kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of our discussion, is that when we start to engage in a sexual interaction, sometimes our body starts to bring up emotions or thoughts about something else, right? Maybe a hurt that we have felt or a misunderstanding. And it creates a little emotion for us. And maybe, and in this case, maybe we'll say it's a negative emotion. So my advice is stop the arousal, stop the sexual interaction, and talk about that emotion. Now, like I said, almost every time someone will raise their hand and say, oh, if I do that, then I won't get back into the moment, and I won't feel the arousal that I was feeling. And so I would rather just kind of shove that emotion, that negative emotion, down. I would rather put it aside and not deal with that. My advice is that's not a very responsible or healthy way to treat our body. Our body brings up, our emotions are just little flags, right? They're just little flags that say, they signal that something is out of balance,
right,
in our experience. And so when we ignore that, what we're really doing is, if we do it on a regular basis, if we're consistently ignoring those emotions, then we start to blunt our emotions, right? We start to kind of numb ourselves to those emotions. And then we actually feel less arousal. We feel less connection with our partner. So even in good marriages, where people think that they're pretty close to each other, they're pretty connected, they have a happy relationship, sometimes there are little hurts that we haven't addressed. Maybe we just forgot about it, but then it rises to the surface at some point. So if you're in an intimate moment and some sort of negative emotion comes up, just respect that. Give it a little space, resolve it. Guarantee what will happen is, as we honor whoever it is, whichever partner had this come up for them, they will feel more connected and more in tune with their partner, and arousal will become more easy to access, and we'll feel greater connection because emotionally we're connecting with each other. All of these things are related. They're all, intertwined. And when we ignore the emotional side and just focus on the physical arousal, we miss this really beautiful part that could be contributing.
Got it. So just to illustrate that, are you talking about, like, let's say you're starting to kiss and touch and things are starting to feel really good, and the thought pops in your head, wait a minute, you didn't pick up the milk like I asked you to. And so instead of like shoving that away, like to like pause the kissing for a second and address that.
Yeah. And just say, you know what? It kind of hurt my feelings the other day when you forgot the milk. You probably didn't, it probably just slipped your mind, but could we just address that for a second? And then hopefully, that would be easily resolved and you would continue. That would create even greater emotional connection because we're honoring the feelings of each other. We're not being hostile and saying, I just remembered, you never, whatever. Hopefully, we have a gentle startup and we understand where our partner's coming from and we resolve it, right? And that's usually pretty easy in couples who have a good foundation of a relationship.
Yeah, that's so important to have a good foundation.
Yeah.
Mindfulness, I feel like, is like a two-part thing. One is becoming more aware of the present and my body, like being here, not someplace else. And second, it's also being able to focus and concentrate for an extended period of time on one thing. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. I think that you also have to include, especially for sex, you also have to include this element of letting go of judgment. When something comes up that maybe I feel uncomfortable about in sex, maybe my partner wanted to try a different position or try something a little more creative, and I automatically thought, I don't think that's okay. That seems like that might be a little shameful. Instead, just saying, I wonder why he or she wants to do that. Let's discuss that and let's be a little curious about that instead of being judgmental.
That curiosity sure goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yes. It's such a positive, gentle way to interact with something that's unknown to us. When our partner has, a different response, or, wants to try something new, and maybe we're the less creative one, being curious instead of judgmental will really help you kind of bridge that gap.
It doesn't mean you have to do it, but
It
get
doesn't
curious, find out why. And
yeah. And what may happen is you learn something new about your partner, that maybe they've had this secret, fantasy of, whatever, and it helps you understand them in a different way. And again, you don't have to go ahead and do it, but you may want to after you learn why they're so, interested in whatever it is.
Yeah. And that curiosity, I say, goes both ways. If I'm, for instance, the creative one saying, hey, I want to do this, and my wife says no, this is my opportunity to get curious too. It's like, instead of like feeling rejected or whatever too.
And in fact, that brings me to, an interesting point, that intimacy actually means learning something new, right? We create intimacy when we learn something new about our partner. And sometimes that can even be, kind of in an uncomfortable way. Like maybe there's hurt feelings or a misunderstanding. Here's my opportunity to be curious and to say, why did we have this misunderstanding? Or why did you respond that way? And why did my feelings get hurt? Trying to understand myself, but also understand my partner through curiosity. And it's through that curiosity that we create this new knowledge about each other. And that's intimacy.
Definitely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Leavitt. This has been fantastic.
This has been fun for me too. Thank you, Dan.
Where's a good place for people to go to find more about your work?
Yeah, you can visit my website. It's just Chelom Leavitt, if you know how to spell my name, Chelom, Leavitt, Leavitt.com. And I have a number of podcasts and blogs that talk about women's sexuality, couples, sexual mindfulness, and then also talking to your kids about sex. So it's a nice place to, maybe learn a little more information, all based in research about sexuality.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.